I'm Brian Camborne, and I'm sharing this session with my co-author, Deborah Crouch. The title of our session is Looking Closely at Classroom Language and Practice. The purpose of today's session is to explore some new thinking on the relationship between classroom practice and the embedded metaphors in our discourse. To do this, we will first of all examine several examples of teaching and learning. Then we'll consider how shifts in our language and actions, what we refer to as our discourse, affect our classroom behaviour. And finally, we'll consider how embedded metaphors influence our discourse.
So in our book, Made for Learning, we are going to explore the alignment between how our theory of learning, which is really our beliefs about how learning occurs, and the instructional decisions that we make in practice. And in our book, we show lots of examples, but we also discuss what we call mismatches, which are times when our theory and our practice don't align. And so, we know that if we're ever to make changes to our practice that are going to support students' learning, we really must be aware of the alignment between our theory and our practice. So let us show you some examples of what we mean. So in most classrooms, teachers share and display student writing. And so one of the really prevalent practices that you see represented here in this photo is where teachers create a spot for each student's writing and then occasionally add some student writing that's done by each student. That's to ensure that every child's writing is represented, which is a really good thing. That's something that we want. But I look at these kinds of displays and it makes me wonder about the messages that it sends to students about the purpose of writing. Is writing something that it's about displaying it, or is it something that we want to be read by others? And so in contrast, let me share another experience with you of a classroom that I visited recently. I was in Cheryl David's second and third grade classroom here in San Diego Unified School District where I live. And I came in during her writing workshop. And so her researchers, as she was referring to the students, were learning about different animals that they had chosen in order to craft a report about the animal. And so, I came in and they were in the midst of all of their research. And when the timer went off to indicate that it was, approaching the end of independent writing time, there was this really loud groan that went through the classroom. And what I cracked up because the students were all saying things like, oh, it can't be time to stop already. And, can't we have more time? And I loved because Cheryl, she's just acknowledged how difficult it is to stop when you're really engaged in learning. And she said, but we need to make sure that we have some time for sharing because we want to share how your research is going. And we want to be, talking about some of the interesting things that you learned today as you were in the midst of your research. And so all the children came, they gathered on the rug for sharing. And Cheryl noted how she could infer how interested and engaged they were because of the different actions that she could see where the kids were leaning into their computers and leaning into the books and really just sharing out, all of the things that they were interested in was this next piece. And so as the kids began to share what they had learned about the animals as they were engaged in that research that Cheryl was talking about, the students were responding to each other by talking about how much they couldn't wait to read each other's reports. And so this is the kind of student response about reading each other's writing that is directly related to how a teacher like Cheryl has chosen to have the kids publish their writing. So in Cheryl's classroom, the student writing was published in a way to make it available for others to read. So what you see here in this photo is one of those wonderful display shelves where you see just the fronts of the books. And this was right up in front of the classroom, and it displayed all of these beautiful stories that the kids had written in their previous unit, where they were doing some fiction writing, and it being October, they were focusing in on some spooky stories. Their writing was published into books, and it was displayed on a shelf in front of the room. And as you might guess, these were the most popular independent reading books in the classroom. So when you think about the messages that Cheryl's communicating about the purpose of writing, to her writers, think about how that compares to this wall display, which is really more about displaying and making sure that everybody wrote something, right? It's making sure that everybody sees that everybody wrote. But it's not communicating the same idea that, writers write things for readers so that they've written something because they have something to say to those readers.